everyone. Good evening. Thank you for spending some of your time on a really muggy and ugly mid-June evening to have a very important discussion with us. We have been, as a school community, as a administration, Board of Education, have been dealing for years, if not decades, with how to make sure that our students are as safe as possible throughout all 5 of our schools. Our staff are as safe as possible in our transportation center, as well as district office, 7 different facilities. And a number of events culminated with making tonight happen. I don't want to bore anyone or discuss all of the tragic events that have taken place in schools dating back to almost 2 decades ago. But it feels like with each event that hurts our schools, that takes the lives of innocent children, it rekindles a number of conversations, and one conversation it certainly rekindles is whether or not we're doing all we can to support our kids, our staff, our teachers, and make them feel as safe and secure as possible. So the objective of tonight's meeting is to answer questions that many of you have submitted, and I want to thank you. We had just about 10 folks submit questions over the course of about 5 days. We received right around 50 questions. Many of the questions are going to be entertained tonight. Some of the questions are going to be entertained in a different forum. The questions that just didn't necessarily pertain to tonight's panel will be addressed through other means, and we very well likely will have similar events like tonight for other issues and topics that were brought up, which we'll discuss shortly. So I have a quick overview about tonight, about some of the goals for tonight, and what we want to be able to achieve, and then we'll introduce our panel, and we'll go from there. We were shooting for a conversation between 7 and 8. We started a little bit late, but we have a lot to get through, a lot of information to share. We are videotaping tonight's event, so as soon as it can be edited and put online, that will take place, and we'll let everyone know where to find it. We also have already begun the process of drafting out a transcript of all of the questions and some of the answers that you'll hear tonight from our panel. So real quickly, the goals for tonight, we want everyone here to have a better understanding of our safety practices, make sure that folks understand the roles and responsibilities of various personnel, in particular those who have joined us tonight. We want to provide some updates regarding our capital project and some safety and security upgrades that the Board of Education approved and that our public approved just about 1 month ago. We want to discuss the role of the school resource officer and law enforcement in safety planning. And as many of you know, the district has begun a 3-year commitment with the Westchester County Police for a school resource officer for a school district that will reside here in the high school, but will be able to provide services and support to all 5 schools. So we want to make sure everyone leaves with a clear understanding of the role and responsibility of the school resource officer as well as the county police. And also we'll have a conversation about what we learned. We had a number of drills this year, we had a number of events, and part of our process is to debrief what happened, what went well, what didn't go well, what opportunities we have for improvement, and how we engage ourselves as a district team, how we engage our school teams, our district safety team, our school safety team, to make sure that we can always improve. I want to talk about what to expect moving forward after tonight. In terms of after this evening, as I said, we're going to have a list of frequently asked questions, and we'll continue to build on that based on future events and questions that we receive. And that will help us plan for some summer and fall engagements, whether it's a district event like this or whether it's school specific. Our idea was tonight to give a district overview about safety and security measures and practices, and then be able to have more specific conversations at all 5 schools working with the PTA. Additional resources. We want to make sure that everyone received the school emergency parent guide. This was put together by our team with the help of Alteris, and want to make sure everyone has that 2-page document as a quick resource. Not only are we handing that on tonight. We'll make sure that all parents have it. It's also available on our website. We're going to schedule some events with PTA, which will include guest speakers, assemblies, and a concept known as Parent University. Parent University is known nationwide as an engagement opportunity through the PTA. Different topics with different speakers and opportunities for parents to learn different things that are happening in schools. And lastly, and I touched on earlier, topics that aren't covered tonight, we'll make sure that we provide that additional information and events like tonight. Some of the topics that we received questions and emails on that won't be covered, we want to make sure that you understand that we'll repeat an event like this to make sure those are addressed. We had some questions regarding code of conduct and discipline practices. We had questions regarding mental health and how to support students that are struggling. We had questions regarding bullying, cyberbullying, sexting, and online threats. And those are equally as important as the issues we're going to discuss tonight, but we're going to save those for another event. The individuals that did send those questions, we were able to communicate with and wanted to make sure we provide information as timely as possible. So you'll hear from a number of various people depending on what the questions were, but we'll make sure that you receive that information and then use that to plan another event moving forward. I'd like to introduce tonight's panelists. We have a number of folks who have worked with the district for a long time, folks who are assisting the district and consulting with us, and this is just a few of the people that partake in our district safety team and our measures. John LaPlaca from Alteris Consulting, Cliff Gabrielson from Alteris Consulting, and some of you might know Cliff. He was our DARE officer at our 3 elementary schools working with the town of Cortland, working through the town of Cortland, and his son is a graduate as recent as 4 years ago. We also have Sergeant Amory Bernhardt from the Westchester County Police. We're glad that he's able to join us. Many of you know high school principal Mr. Jim Mackin. We also have Anthony Merlini, our operations and maintenance director, who also spearheads our safety efforts, and John Anderson, our director of security here at the high school. So let me frame tonight's conversation. We took all of your emails and we are going to respond to them verbatim. We're going to read the question and a number of folks are going to weigh in on the answers. As I said, that will contribute to an online frequently asked question document that we'll provide. But there are really 7 themes to tonight's conversation. Many folks are interested in learning more about the district's relationship with Alteris. They are new to the district. We decided to hire them about a year ago to give us a different perspective on our safety practices, on our policies, on our procedures. We had worked with Putnam Northern Westchester BOCES for quite a long time, and the individual who spearheaded the school safety division retired, and we felt it was a good opportunity to perhaps go in a different direction or have a different set of eyes look at our practices. You'll also hear about the capital project. You approved an $18.5 million capital project with roughly 1/3 of that designated for safety and security upgrades. You'll hear about that tonight in terms of technology, video cameras, software, main foyers and entrances, windows and doors. You'll hear about how that project will help strengthen our safety and security measures. There are questions regarding training and preparedness. Who is trained, when they're trained, how they're trained, what are the drills that we engage in. There were some questions around active shooter drills, which we'll be sure to focus on, as well as confidentiality. New York State demands that school districts have a safety plan and that all of the schools within the district have a safety plan, but there are very specific pieces of those plans that aren't available to the public. And those are for confidential reasons to make sure that the wrong people don't get their hands on how we're preparing or how we act or behave in an emergency. Communications, our next topic, is around a relationship with law enforcement and information sharing with law enforcement as well as parents and community, what we can share, what we can't, who gives us authority to share information, as well as decision making. What role does the district play with regards to starting or ending an event, a lockdown, a hold in place, so on and so forth, and what role does law enforcement play in consulting with us. Questions around outside and after school activities. how we're providing support and security presence at athletic events, recess, those sort of items. We'll be able to delve into those. We talked a little bit about the school resource officer, questions around what their day-to-day responsibilities are, what their role and responsibility is handling discipline, and how their role is different than an administrator or teacher or so on and so forth. And lastly, moving forward in next steps, lessons learned, what we've learned, other resources that we can develop and distribute to parents based on interest, based on tonight's conversation and others, as well as school-specific discussions starting in the summer and the fall of 2018. So I'm going to moderate tonight's discussion. We're going to try to get through many questions. You're going to hear, for the most part, different folks from our panel engage with these questions to give different perspectives. And that was really the point of having a diverse panel tonight, so you could understand different points of view, different perspective, different roles and responsibilities with regards to how we handle different situations. So I will start. There was a question regarding the Alteris Consulting Group, where folks were interested in recommendations from Alteris. What are some of the recommendations that Alteris is providing the district on an ongoing basis and moving forward? So I'll throw that over to our friends from Alteris.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming out. Having done probably about a dozen of these public forums in districts throughout the region over the last several months, I can tell you that you're not alone in your concerns about how districts are managing and preparing for emergencies and the safety and security of the building occupants. It's on everyone's mind, and there's been some great dialogues in some of our discussions with other districts around the region. I know that one of the questions will come up down the line, but I would like to kind of frame the conversation a little bit as far as my background, as far as the firm's background. I'm a former law enforcement administrator from here in Westchester County. I was a former police lieutenant with 22 years of experience. I was trained at both the state and federal levels in a variety of emergency management areas. Founded the firm back in 2008. We have a firm of all law enforcement professionals that work with school districts. We currently are working right now with approximately 45 school districts and over 200 schools, both in the region, and we do have a national reach as well. We have schools down as far as Louisiana. So we have a lot of experience. One of the things that when we first got into the business, we realized that while there's a wealth of information out there, a wealth of resources, both in the law enforcement capacity as well as at the federal levels, there really was no systematic blueprint to the way schools were effectively planning for and responding to emergencies. And that's one of the things that we spent a lot of time over the last decade in refining that system so that the steps are in place, the blueprint is in place for not just coming into schools and lecturing, but actually what we call moving the ball down the field. Because essentially, anyone can come into your schools and lecture and leave you with a punch list of things to do. But essentially, we want to make progress. We want to improve the district's condition from where it is today to where it is 12 months from now, from 6 months from now. And certainly, we are always going to see hazards and loopholes in school districts, and we want to make sure that we effectively close those hazards very quickly. So a little bit about the process. When we started with the district about a year ago, is we conducted an initial audit of the school. We did not do a formal assessment of the district, but we did take an inventory of currently where the school was at as far as programs that were in place, how they manage visitors in their buildings, how they manage student movement, how they manage after-school activities, and from there that kind of gives us the benchmark and the basis for our work moving forward. We have worked on developing the emergency plans at each school. You're required to have a building level plan, as the superintendent mentioned, which is a confidential document, which has sensitive information, and that's built around the unique environment of each of the buildings. The state does have a template that requires all schools to follow, but each school needs to develop their own annexes for those plans based upon the unique hazards that might be in the area, and there certainly are some in this area as well. And then there's the district level plan, which all of you have access to, which is on the district's website, which has more general information on how districts prepare for and effectively manage emergencies in their schools. In addition to that, we provided a full-day training program to each of the school's emergency response teams. So this is a cross-section of people at each of the schools that are charged with planning and managing emergencies if one were to occur in each of their school buildings. And we go through a number of different things. There is roughly about 125 planning steps that each school needs to go through. And then there's many more at the district level as well. And we work each of those schools through those planning steps. It's an ongoing process to identify a number of different things that need to be done. In most cases, schools that we start with have about a third of those done already, and then there's a number of different things that we work with them on moving forward. So we revise those plans. We're actively involved in oversight of their drills. Schools are required to conduct 12 emergency drills at a minimum each year, 4 of which are lockdown drills, and we'll talk a little bit more about the specifics on the types of different drills. I know there's questions that are coming up. And we've been providing consultations to the district in a variety of different areas throughout the course of the year. They have unlimited access to us for any type of issue that they may be faced with during the course of the year. I know there's some more specific questions that I can up, so I don't want to get ahead of the...
Sure, so we'll jump into some of those specific ones as well. The question was posed during the lockout, when is it okay to allow access to personnel at a single point of entry or a secondary point of entry? And this was, this is a topic and issue we've struggled with, and I'll take part of it and then I'll turn it over to our panel. We have a number of district functions that operate in 3 different buildings that are not the district office. At Blue Mountain Middle School, our People Personnel Department, our Special Ed office is housed over there in a wing. In the high school, our food service, our district food service office is housed in the back of the cafeteria. And in the basement of Frank G. Lindsay, our instructional technology department is there. And the folks who perform those duties in those 3 separate locations have their own entrance to the building. They have their own access. They have their own doorway. We have swipe badges with access. Some have keys. And what we learned is during most recent lockout is a question that we posed to Alteris after the event. We do a debriefing. And a number of us had a phone conversation to say, well, we learned a couple things. One thing we learned was we were using a single point of entry. There's a single point of entry regardless of the facility, including district office. I'll mention district office has 2 entrances at the top and at the bottom to the west of the building. And it was a head scratcher for us because it was an issue that you cross that issue when it actually happens. So one of the questions we posed to John and to Cliff was, what changes, if any, will we need to make going forward, that if we are at a particular situation with a single point of entry, what's the responsibility of the folks from those other departments to use a single point of entry in the school, or do they continue to use their access point, which is designated for them? So I'll turn that back over to John and Cliff.
Sure. I mean, one of the questions tonight is what is the difference between a lockout and a lockdown? So a lockout is a situation where there is, and this is defined in the building level emergency plans, as an imminent concern outside of the building. Not an imminent threat, but an imminent concern. So an example of that might be police activity in the area. So if the local police department says, hey, there was a bank robbery down the road, we're chasing someone in the area that could potentially pose a threat to one of the school buildings, we recommend that you go in lockout. What happens in a lockout is all outside activities are moved inside the building. They're canceled at that point. So gym classes, recess, everyone moves inside the building. The perimeter of the building is inspected to ensure that it is secure, meaning that all doors are locked. You never take for granted the fact that simply because the door is closed, it is in fact locked. Because we know that school buildings tend to age, doors get propped, doors may not close effectively, so we verify the perimeter of the building is in fact locked and secured. Normal operations are ongoing inside of the building, and one of the big questions is, can we leave the building? And the answer is generally no, that you cannot leave the building in a lockout. There should not be any traffic of visitors coming to the building, because if one of you is coming to the building to drop something off or to visit, and we know that there's some type of imminent concern in the area, we don't want you to encounter that threat as well. So visitors are typically restricted from coming to the buildings. That being said, the lockout is one of the protocols that typically law enforcement, and that might be our local police department here, it might be the county police, it might be the state police, are the ones that have the most information about what the particular threat is to the community. And in collaboration with the district, a determination is made as to whether or not any staff people can move from building to building at that point. And that's made in collaboration with them. So there are times where the lockout is it's revised. But typically, in most cases, in a lockout situation, traffic outside the building is restricted.
Next question is a school shooting the only safety concern a district has and should prepare for? Sure.
So, when we start working with school districts, it's typically as a result of a catalyst of something that's occurred, Sandy Hook, Parkland, and a host of other issues that becomes a concern. Many years ago, before we had 24-hour news cycles, before the CNNs, the Fox Newses, you didn't hear about a lot of these things that were going on there. Now, it's constantly in the media. Many of you might be surprised to hear that, in fact, statistically, schools are actually safer now than they were several decades ago. And statistically, schools are safer than even private work environments that many of you probably work in. Unfortunately, because of the precious assets in our school buildings, when something does occur, it takes on a new meaning. And I think everyone up here understands that as well. The reality is that even though you have to prepare for the worst of the worst, the active shooters that might occur or other catastrophic incidents, schools are far more likely to face a host of other issues in their schools. Infrastructure failures, weather-related issues, non-custodial parents, other types of violence. And they need to prepare for all of those things. And there are a number of different protocols that are in place, trainings that are in place, drills that are in place, that are designed to make sure that schools have that all hazards approach. So by utilizing one or a combination of protocols, they can respond effectively to any incident they may be faced with. So while they are trained in the worst of the worst, the active shooter situation, on how to respond, and there's a response protocol that goes along with that. There are contingency plans that go along with that response protocol. So again, it's not a situation where we do one thing, that's it, and it stops. If we do this one protocol and we need to pivot at that point because the situation has changed, we do that. Common sense also has to factor into all of the emergency response protocols that we utilize. Because again, we can't possibly be on the shoulders of every employee in the district to say, you need to do this. We want to develop muscle memory of everyone in the school district, but at the same time, they have to exercise common sense to say, it's not safe to do that, or I need to work it this way. And we go over that routinely. We conduct tabletop exercises with realistic events that are built around their buildings to say, what if you were faced with this? And we learn something every time. Just like when you have real events in districts, it is always, to coin a phrase from the education industry, is a teachable moment. If you're not learning something from every drill, if you're not learning something from every incident that happens, then you're not doing it correctly. We know that even emergency responders who are trained constantly on how to respond to emergencies, you see that there are failures in response. These are critical incidents, high-stress states. So while we want to be perfect every single time, there are going to be times where we're going to learn things. We hope that there's never a situation where there's injury or worse. But again, that's why we practice constantly, to identify those gaps and loopholes and to refine moving forward.
We're going to move to a question regarding school resource officers, and while we do that, I want to make sure I recognize some very special people who are here with us. The Chief of the Buchanan Police Department, Chief Tubbs, thank you for joining us. We have Officer Ramirez from the Westchester County Police, who's with us, deciding if he's going to join us as our SRO. So far, he's interested in joining our team. We have a number of board members. Our board president, Barbara Pedersen, and vice president, Carol Abraham, are with us, as well as trustee of the board, Corey Nutrika and Lori Ryan. We have a number of PTA leaders and officers who are with us, and we even have a couple staff. So thank you, again, thank you everyone for joining us. The next question, as I alluded to, is regarding school resource officers. What is the district policy on including school resource officers in disciplinary matters? I'll kick it off and then I'll turn it over to Mr. Mackin and Sergeant. Our code of conduct, in fact, New York State law, is very specific and has scripted in very specific terms, which is in our code of conduct, the roles and responsibilities of a police officer in school, whether it's a school resource officer or a police officer in school. They cannot handle day-to-day discipline. They cannot interrogate students within the school walls without parental consent, but they can assist, they can advise, and they can supervise various administrative functions with regards to discipline. And that's not just a Hendrick Hudson school rule, that is the state of New York. So our school district is no stranger to school resource officers. We have had a school resource officer in the past. as recently as maybe 6 or 7 years ago. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Mackin, our high school principal, to speak about school resource officers as well as our sergeant.
Thanks, Joe. First, I want to acknowledge everyone coming here tonight. These are emotional topics. As a father of 4, I certainly wear 2 hats, and I understand how important these topics are. I want you to understand that. I truly do. My role as a father and as a principal, there's no clear line there when I come to work. I understand how important your children are to you, and they're my children for the hours that they're here. So with that said, I appreciate you being here, and hopefully we can answer as many of the questions as we can tonight. School resource officer historically at Hendrick Hudson High School was here shortly after Columbine. The state had a grant that they were offering to school districts that would allow for the state to help in paying for the cost of a school resource officer. Back, I believe in 2000, I came here to Hendrick Hudson in 2002, but in 2000, 2001, Hendrick Hudson was a recipient of that 5-year grant, and that started the relationship with the New York State Police. And we had a very, very positive school resource officer program here, and it ran roughly through 2008, even after the grant had gone away. As Joe said, school resource officer's role is not as a disciplinarian. It's very clear and specific, and it is to build relationships and be a liaison between the police and students. It's to build a more positive relationship between students. It's to give the students another person that potentially they feel more comfortable speaking with about issues. But again, their role is not as a disciplinarian. It does not mean when they're here that they stop being a police officer. If there is a criminal act, criminal activity, they have an obligation based on their position as a police officer to work with the school district to mitigate those issues. But it's not solely a priority as having a school resource officer as safety. It's really to build a relationship with students so they feel more comfortable with the police. Officer Bernhardt?
So I think it's important to stress the point that a school resource officer really comes in for a threefold reason: educator, a counselor, mentor, and law enforcement. You can't deny that it's a police officer there, they're there for safety, and that is an important role. But there's another important role which I think sometimes gets overlooked, is educator. There's a lot of things that we can help educate, whether it be safety for the children, whether it be the effects of drugs and alcohol on driving. There's a lot of things which we actually are the experts in when it comes to enforcing them. And we can give a really good perspective to students about the troubles things that lead to, for crime. The other part is counselor and mentor. And one of the things which really hits home for me is if I'm walking out in public and I see a kid or a child and the mother all of a sudden looks to me and says, "Oh, watch out, he's gonna lock you up." It kind of breaks my heart a little bit. I've got kids too. I don't want them seeing me and all of a sudden think, "Oh, I'm the bad guy here to lock them up." I think it's an important part to see that officer as part of the community, as your brother, your sister, your cousin, your uncle, your son, your daughter. We are part of the community. The police are the public, and the public are the police. So I think it's important to have that as a mentorship. And that's one of really, I think, is the main driving force, is that positive role model of law enforcement to help build that relationship with the school and with the community.
I think it was really important step that the board took in adopting the school resource officer program back. It's something that we have been clamoring for, and the board listened, and I'm appreciative of that. And I'm also looking forward. I think in my brief conversations with Officer Bernhardt, like anything else, programs evolve. What the school resource officer program was back in 2002, it certainly, I think, has evolved, especially in that educator area, where there's a lot more function, I believe, from just my short conversations with Officer Bernhardt about how we work the school resource officer into the education piece, which is really important, very, very important.
Thank you. We're also going to go right back to Mr. Mackin to talk about some experiences at the high school with regards to when is it okay for a school door to be left propped open. I know we had an incident not too long ago, some questions were asked, and then I'll ask Mr. Anderson as well as Alteris.
Sure. It's never regular practice within a school, especially historically what we've been dealing with in schools over the last 10 to 20 years, to have the school door propped open. And we work with our staff daily to remind them that this is not a practice that we support, and they need to change their ways. There is certainly human error when we talk about things like this, or people that seem to lack that muscle memory, as the once talked about. But there are cases where it is done. And let's talk about a couple of weeks ago when there were some pictures posted online of doors propped open. Those doors on the dome were propped open. We were having a blood drive. The heat it was getting pretty warm in there. Students were giving blood. What you don't see in the pictures is at all times there were security guards at those doors. So they were secured as far as we were concerned. They were supervised, and that was the reason we allowed those doors to be open. Because of the heat level, because of the effects of some of the students giving blood, we felt that we did that safely. There was also another picture online of a gym door propped open, and that's not acceptable. So, that's something that I take responsibility for, and those people that may have been responsible were spoken to, signs were put up, and we continue to be vigilant in trying to ensure that people are following the rules, and if they don't, they are spoken to, and we keep doing that. And that's part of learning.
John, with anything?
Yeah, we are constantly walking the buildings in different areas, trying to make sure doors are closed at all times. And there are sometimes a kid walks out, the doors are shut all the way, sometimes they'll run out, so they're going to tech, they're going to something else, and we're just walking right after them and just close the doors. And it does happen, but it's infrequent, and we try to continue to do so. Hopefully with the new state-of-the-art security systems that we're hopefully putting in, there'll be some better alerts on our phones that we can go to the door, actually know the door's open, and we'll close the door.
I want to make a comment. I don't think schools were designed, quite frankly, to be the absolute most secure buildings ever made. If you walk around this building, you have upwards north of 65 exits and entrances throughout the building. To be able to man every door or to be able to supervise every door is a difficulty. Certainly even with technology, because technology is not foolproof either. We continue to be as diligent as we can, and we will continue to do that.
You just want to wait?
I guess to your point about the way schools are designed, unfortunately, that's still the case now. We're still working with school districts right in this county that were built less than a decade ago that require students to move from building to building to building throughout the course of the instructional day. Gym, separate building, cafeteria, separate building. So we're talking about propping a door because of a variety of reasons, and it's not always staff, sometimes it's students, we understand that as well. The HVAC in the buildings, the heating and air conditioning in the buildings was not designed for summer months necessarily, causes problems. But essentially, you have to be as vigilant as possible. Technology certainly can play a role, as we're talking about, as far as knowing when a door is open that very second, or knowing when a door stays open for a prolonged period of time. So that would kind of mean that the door is open, it should never be open, or the door is being propped open by someone inserting something in there because they don't want to walk around the building to get back inside. So it's something that schools struggle with constantly, and I know here at Hendrick Hudson they're vigilant about trying to keep those doors shut, but there are going to be times where people are not, playing by the rules. And it's a matter of making sure that the rules are enforced and escalate when necessary with the people that are perpetrators of it.
Good segue to the next question around security software. Mr. Mackin mentioned the potential of adding a security software so we know what doors are open, when, triggering open doors to security cameras so we can identify any doors that are open or people that are moving in and out. So we'll start with our friends from Alteris. What if any security software do you recommend as we begin the planning phase of really beefing up safety and security measures that can assist administrators, teachers, and kids to make sure that things are as tight as possible?
So there's a number of different things that are out there, and I'll defer some of them to Anthony, Facilities Director. Some of them deal with visitor management as far as the ability to screen people that are coming into your buildings. It allows them to screen them against certain databases. More importantly, to keep an internal database of people that the district might have had an issue with Whether they're changing from school to school, it's a district-wide networkable database. It allows them to be credentialed so that they're walking through the buildings, because we want people to be, if they're in our buildings, we want them to be readily identifiable as a visitor. If someone walks through a school building right now and the staff does not recognize that person as an employee, does not see any type of visitor credentials on them, they are to be challenged. Say, can I help you? Where are you going? What are you doing? Because they potentially are a threat in the building. If there's non-compliance with that, the school knows that they need to implement a protocol to lock down, because we don't know who that person is, and that can occur. Door jar sensors that are actually monitoring buildings that we talked about. Lockdown panic systems that enable, one of the biggest challenges, especially in a large building like your high school, is if there is some type of critical incident, that someone sees an imminent threat at one part of the building, how do we let everyone in the building know to respond effectively to that, as far as locking down or evacuating the building, depending on what the issue is there. There are systems in place that enable you to, press a button, utilize an app, utilize your phone to be able to trigger that, and it does it automatically. It can close doors, it can deactivate card readers, it can send out text messages, it can alert the police department. It does it automatically, because in a critical incident, many of these things happen very quickly, and they're very difficult to make sure. So those are some of the things. I'll turn it over to you, some of the things that you're looking at right now as well.
Sure. So with the smart bond, which was something that was provided by the state, we had money allotted to us that we could put into the buildings. And one of the things that we decided to do with that was upgrade our phone system, so that, and there's software that goes along with that phone system that I'll talk about, and also our surveillance system with the Vigilance system. And like everybody's alluding to, we have door contacts on the doors. Some of them have to be added, but most of the doors, a good 99% of the doors have door contacts on them, and those door contacts are tied into our security system. And John can get alerts on his phone if that door is left propped open or for any extended period of time. It can send him a text message, it can send him an email, and like you said, if there becomes a problem, it can alert a camera also to turn on and watch who's coming in and out of that door and send him that video. So now he knows exactly who the other individual is coming in and out of that door, propping that door open, so it's not a guessing game and trying to hunt down that individual. Along those lines, with the Cisco phone system, there's also something called InformaCast, which is a software program that ties into those phones. So with the smart bond, what we decided to do, in concert with Matthew Swerdloff, is get phones into all the different classrooms and offices throughout the buildings. Originally, we didn't have phones in everybody's room. We had a PA phone so they could call the main desk, but in an emergency, they couldn't call out. They couldn't call for parents to go over a view with their child of how they're doing in class, etc. So the smart bond provided those phones inside the classrooms now. So now we have that. Now over the summer we're going to implement some of the software and get some of that software up and running. So eventually with that phone system, we'll have the ability during the lockdown to hit a series of buttons, and that individual can put the building in lockdown if we have door hardware in place that will be able to respond to that call for locking down the building, locking down the exterior doors, etc. So it's instantaneously, not a call to someone else to a call to someone else, so they have to put the building in lockdown. The other thing that software provides is notifications out to individuals. So we'll be able to inform staff. So if we're in a lockdown where everybody's going into a lockdown situation, and typically if you're in a lockdown, you don't have access to a phone, but you may have your cell phone unless you left it on your desk. So now, in a lockdown, I'll get a notification, the superintendent can get a notification, other staff can get a notification. Maybe staff has left the building, they'll get a notification that the building is locked down. They know not to come back to their building. Maybe they stepped out for lunch or something. They'll know that there's a situation going on at that building, so they don't compromise the security of that building. So there are a lot of different programs and things out there that this smart bond is allowing us to do. A lot of that will be implemented over the summer and further into this next school year as well. And they also alluded to doing a visitor management program, and that visitor management program will be tied in to building. So like they said, we can be able to see people going from building to building and track that visitor, and if there's any issues with that visitor. And that's about it for that.
Continuing with the theme of capital project and security, question was posed, will Alteris and local law enforcement be involved with the recommendations for the redesigned entries to the schools? Will recommendations be implemented before or after the entries are remodeled? And I just want to take us back a little bit. Someone had mentioned, I think Jim mentioned, you know, our schools were not necessarily designed in the era that they were designed and built with safety in mind. If you take a look at our 3 elementary schools, those 3 schools have very, very similar designs where you walk in the main door and you are practically within a number of steps in the hub of the building. You're near the main office, you're near the gymnasium, you're near the auditorium, the cafeteria, the library, and you can go in many different directions and access virtually all of the classrooms. Part of our capital project, a significant portion, while we certainly are going to upgrade and continue to have a robust technology system and surveillance system and software system, is the redesign of those 3 foyers. Think about the middle school. Middle school, a beautiful renovation was done less than 20 years ago, and we're going to have to remodel that entryway because in similar fashion to the elementary schools, you walk into the middle school, and while the main office is a few steps away, you can get upstairs, down the 8th grade wing, special ed, around the corner. So a very significant piece of our capital project in terms of architectural design, working with our construction managers, is going to give everyone, parents, families, including children, a much different experience when they enter those 3 schools. And it's going to feel different. And it's going to feel different because we have to invest in an infrastructure to make sure that those schools are safety conscious first, when they were designed many, many decades ago to be hubs of the community. But that's the era we live in, that's where we are right now, and those are some steps, necessary steps we have to take. So will Alteris and law enforcement be involved in the recommendations, and will those recommendations be before or after the entry? So I'll turn it back over to Anthony Merlini to start.
Right, so, you know, when we get into all this, yeah, we're going to have a host of individuals that will be consulted when the time comes for the design of the entries of the school. We'll be working with our consultant Alteris, working with local law enforcement. We'll have architects, engineers on board, and others that specialize in security. The one nice thing about, you know, having Alteris and other law enforcement officials here and being familiar with the design is that they see other school districts, what they're doing, what works in other school districts, what doesn't work in other school districts. So from a constructability standpoint, we're looking for their expertise and ideas because they've seen other school districts try to implement this as well. And so we're going to solicit those, we'll see what comes up, and we'll base the remodeling on that. We're going to do it beforehand. But that's not to say if while the SED or the state is reviewing our designs or something like that, we may change it. Maybe something comes up that's a better design, something new is happening, you know, whatever that's out there, and we may, you know, amend what we're doing also. So we're going to constantly look at the most up-to-date design, and we're going to try to work with all our design professionals to get the right system that works for our buildings.
Anything you just want to?
Just one note is that, you know, we talked about SED, the State Education Department, and here in New York, they are actively involved in every element of construction in school buildings, to the extent of projects take, what's the turnaround time, probably in excess of 40 weeks right now to get looked at and approved. So everything that, you know, the districts are doing has to go through that process. They're trying to expedite things now by having third-party reviews where there are engineering firms that will look at them. There's a fee. Typically, it's worthwhile doing that because construction costs go up an average of 3 to 5% a year. So the savings that you have there, we're not waiting a year. But SED gets involved in those things as well. So in addition to the designability, you have SED looking at it from the standpoint of safety and fire code, all those types of things. And architects that are experienced in designing schools are usually pretty good at trying to find that balance between safety and still, you know, addressing the fact that it's a school. And we want to have that warm, open environment, but at the same time, we want to make sure that the building occupants are safe throughout the course of the day.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Do you recommend security be utilized during after-hour events that take place at the schools? We'll start with We'll start with Anthony, and then Mr. Mackin and Mr. Anderson will jump in.
7:51 p.m.
All right, so currently we have safety security officers in place, and we're looking at adding to that staff. We're also, as we spoke about, looking at getting our SRO, which is going to help us diversify and move people around the district depending on the event and what's transpiring. So we're looking at that going forward and how we're going to manage that and what we do. We can't really specifically get into too much about that because we don't like to discuss too much when it comes to our safety protocols, what we're doing certain events and things like that. But you will see a greater presence at events.
So I think it's important to know from my perspective as a building principal, during the day, during the instructional day, it's vastly different as managing school security. Any principal will tell you that the most difficult times or the most anxiety-ridden times are the times after that last bell rings and what happens between the time that bell rings and the time it rings the next day. And that's because schools have traditionally been hubs of the community. And in particular, when I came here back in 2002, that was something that I really appreciated about Hendrick Hudson, that this building was really used, people were in and out of it, it was a community, it was a very much an open community building. Unfortunately, that has to continue to change. Each week, the week prior to the upcoming week, will review events that are upcoming for the high school. And we will look and prioritize based on the staffing that we have, as well as looking at the schedule for the week during school to understand how can we maximize the staff that we have. Again, we don't have a staff of 30 security guards / chaperones. So we have to be very creative with how we prioritize things. I will tell you, I sit on the Section 1 Athletics Board as their president, and I can tell you that our high school in particular is one of the schools that it does a really good job at sending security to games and away games and having a presence at games. The other piece that you have to understand is, again, this is a building that's used by the community. So when you start to look at outside events, our day may end at 2:07, our athletics may end at 5 o'clock, but then the town comes in, or somebody that's rented the building comes in, and how do we manage that? And it's an overwhelming, I'm not going to lie, it's an overwhelming task because there's a lot of work, moving parts. So we have to work with John, the athletic director, Mr. Baker, the people in the town of Cortland for their activities to try to make sure that we're covered to the extent that we need to be covered and can be covered for after-school events. If I'm being honest, would I like it to be better? Of course. I'd like to have way more people, if I'm being honest, but I think we're working towards that. I think the board is committed to adding 3 more security officers minimally, plus the SRO, and that will greatly increase our presence on and off the field and after school.
I think one of the issues we're grappling with is the volume of building use. Drive by any of our schools almost any day of the week and you will see activity. You'll see cars parked, you'll see kids, there's evening events, there's concerts, there's PTA meetings, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, you name it. And some of the issue and conversations Anthony and I have had with Johnny Anderson is how or should we create a greater concentration of evening or after school events in a particular school so that we can drive our resources to that particular school. So let's just say in September and October, Furnace Woods is going to host all evening activities, whether it's a PTA meeting, whether it's a Board of Education meeting, whether or not the high school, some various high school club or community club needs to use our space in order to engage with folks, and then we can use our staff and allocate our staff a little more responsibly or cost effectively to that one particular building. Now, I think it would be a little weird that if the BVPTA meeting was taking place in Furnace Woods at the same time that the Frank G PTA was taking place. But if you think of trying to draw as many events to one particular location so that you don't have other events at 4 other schools, that's a different way of looking at addressing the issue. As was said earlier, we committed $250,000, $250,000 in our budget that will start July 1st for increased security personnel and school resource officers. So when we are working with a finite number of individuals to deploy, not just in the high school, not just in a flex schedule, not just at concerts and athletic events, including away games, but how do we deploy that crew to make sure that there's a presence in all 5 buildings? So there's a balance and there's a tension. There's a tension between having schools open and accessible to our entire community. Our seniors use our schools. Our little guys are playing soccer on the field. Creating what has created that tension is the difference between open access and availability and opportunity to the community's facilities versus being able to really guarantee a safe and secure environment with a presence of either law enforcement or security personnel. This question is for Alteris, and they're going to answer what they can, because this gets into some confidentiality issues, which we'll certainly talk about. But what do you see as the district's safety and security weaknesses, and how do you recommend we work to fix them?
And that's a tough question to answer, because again, we're not looking to uncover the vulnerabilities in a public forum as far as what the district is doing. Having worked with many districts over the years, I will tell you, we're very open and honest in our approach to it, because again, we're not here to simply tell a district that everything's great and that's why you have to keep us here. Bottom line is that we reinforce as many of the things that the district is doing correctly as we do as identify improvement opportunities. I will tell you that we identified a number of things that the district was doing well, and many districts, it's funny when you think about it, many districts aren't sure about whether they're doing it. They say, well, we think we're doing it right, but are we really doing it right? What are the districts doing? And that's a lot of part of what we do. And many of the improvement opportunities that we've spoken with, particularly the critical ones, those gaps have been closed in short order. Is there more work to do? Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. And it's not something that happens overnight. Again, we're at the mercy of SED on a number of these things, funding on some of these things. After school is on our radar as well. That's something that we're concerned about. School buses. We talk about after school, going back to that point for a moment. Most of us in this room here probably remember the days when there were scissor gates in hallways. Remember the gates that they would bring across the hallways? Well, you don't see them anymore because it's against fire code. So when you put those gates in there, you're essentially potentially trapping people in a corridor, and it's a fire code violation. But that has kind of made it exponentially harder for schools to keep people in a small area of the school. So when you have a big building like the high school, we may be utilizing the high school, but we're only utilizing one room, but you could potentially walk out the door and have access to the remainder of the building. So there's procedures in place as far as how custodians clean the building, the rooms that they go in. We spend a lot of our time with training. We talk about technology. Technology helps to reinforce what schools are doing. It has its place. But technology does not respond to emergencies. People do. And it's critically important that everyone in the school district, from the cafeteria worker all the way through the superintendent, has the muscle memory to respond effectively, to prevent things from happening whenever possible. And when they can't prevent them, to be able to respond effectively. Being empowered to implement protocol in every building. And that's a process that we've already invested quite a bit of time with each of the buildings. We continue to do that because, again, it's not a one-off thing. It's a perpetual cycle of making sure that we maintain that level of proficiency so that people know what to do, and it's instinctual, just like with law enforcement. There is no time to sit for a manual to determine, do I need to use deadly physical force against the person that has a gun pointed at me? It's got to be muscle memory at that point. The same thing goes through in schools as well. So training is a big component. I think the amount of training that was being conducted certainly was improved upon since we've been working with the district. There were some technical gaps that we've been working on. Certainly things like vestibules that we've talked about are things that are very much being looked at right now, but unfortunately it's a slow process. Not because the district doesn't want to do it, but because of the fact that there are many, many hurdles to overcome when you're dealing with school buildings. So, they're looking forward on projects and trying to move as quickly as possible to make sure that they get those things in place. The district is well on its way. There are certainly areas that are going to be improved upon, and certainly many that have been improved upon already.
And I mentioned earlier the debrief process. After an event, school teams may meet. The district team, in the case of an event not too long ago, met to ask very targeted questions: what we did well, what we didn't, where we need to improve, and we go back to the drawing board, making sure we communicated effectively, efficiently, but not too quickly to step on each other's toes, and to give that feedback to the folks who are involved and engaged in that activity. But we had a few people join us since we began, so this may feel like a repeat question, but an opportunity to reintroduce John LaPlaca and Cliff Gabrielson from Alteris, and I'll have Anthony Merlini one more time go through or review how we ended up with Alteris, the contract with them through BOCES, as well as a list of referring schools that Alteris has worked with.
So we have access to COSER through BOCES, where we can access consultants for various different tasks that we need to perform in school buildings. And we rely on BOCES to do the vetting process. They ask several consultants to come in, they make recommendations, and they go through a bidding process on their end. And it makes it very easy for us to access these professionals for us to use in our daily goings-on of the schools. So one of them, I went to several different presentations in Southern BOCES. Alteris was there. I liked what they had to say. We went through the process, figure out how we can access them through our COSER. We were able to pay for their services, and through the COSER we actually get a percentage of the money back through the state. So it's beneficial for us to go through these COSERs to access different service providers, and BOCES did the vetting for us. They went through the process, they interviewed the different consultants, and one of the ones that they recommended for us was Alteris. And like I said, I liked what they had to say. I liked their approach, like the methods for doing their training. They come very highly recommended. They, like John said earlier, they're working in like 200 schools, maybe 40 different school districts, etc. Presently, they're all throughout the county around us. They're in Lakeland, they're in Tarrytown, they're in Croton, Bedford, etc. So when it comes to that touch, and I can refer back to those districts because I have my component individuals in those other districts. I can get feedback from them as well, and I can call the individual in Croton and say, how are they doing for you? Do you like them? Do you not like them? Etc. And that helped in the process to get to the point where we're out there.
Thank you. Make sure I didn't lose my place here. Since the bond has passed, so Anthony will kick this back to you. Since the bond has passed, we're in the planning phase for purchase of materials, design, structure of new entries in the 5 buildings. What safety technology will be determined before and after the design of the entries? We touched a little bit on it. I'll weigh in here for a moment. Anthony mentioned the Smart Schools Bond. The Smart Schools Bond was money through, actually the voters approved it a number of years ago as part of the general election referendum. And it opened up state funds for schools to improve their facilities, their technology, their security, a number of areas. Pre-K, you had a whole list to choose from to be eligible. And we chose technology infrastructure as well as security upgrades. And Anthony and myself and John Anderson and Jim Mackin and a couple other folks went down to a number of security technology demonstrations at the Lower Hudson Regional Information Center. That's sponsored by the Southern Westchester BOCES. We heard from various vendors. We looked at various software, equipment, from cameras, with regards to bandwidth and technology and wireless devices. So it's amazing, even since that point, how far technology companies have grown to move away not just from being an instructional technology outfit or being able to provide mobile learning, but get into school safety and technology. So if you just want to highlight a couple other technology opportunities.
So we discussed a little bit about this earlier with the vestibules and where people are coming in, so they're not 100% inside the building. And this question is, again, asking about the design. Will it be determined before or after? Again, we're going to be working with those design professionals and the consultants to find out the best design at that time. But a couple things going back to the smart line again. You know, with the Cisco phones that we have in the buildings, inside the main office, how we currently buzz people into the buildings is we have a camera outside, there's a microphone, a button that individuals can press, and it comes to a main desk. And then we typically only have maybe 2 people inside the building that can access that buzzer device and buzz people in. With the new system, with the Cisco phones, I can direct that buzz in to anybody else that has that type of phone. Now, everybody doesn't have the same type of phone, but there are phones that have camera capability. So the principals, the secretaries, maybe in the nurse's office, we can add them. So you'll be able to buzz in at the end of the day, and you'll still get somebody on the other end of it. So we're looking at all these different things that enhance our system so that moving forward, we try to have the best technology out there. And as things change, and you know, the software and programming changes very fast around here, we'll keep on top of that and see what the best management system is for those different devices and see how we can get the best value for the school district.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Mr. Mackin to respond to this question regarding responsibilities of the parent. What are my responsibilities as a parent in the occurrence of a security situation? How are these responsibilities communicated?
Responsibilities. You know, I think first we have to recognize that there's no one group that owns responsibility of keeping our students safe. I mean, it's a joint responsibility that we all share. And again, these are emotional issues that we're dealing with. I think as a parent, you need to be aware of the code of conduct, the policies, to the extent that we're able to share them with you. But I think the best way to be, or the best way to describe your responsibility as a way you can be an active participant is to make sure that you're communicating with the school. That's how you can be an active partner. That's how you can be responsible to make sure we're maintaining the safest environment possible. So if you see a door open, call me. Tell me the door's open. Email me. If you see something, you need to let us know. And I know that's a difficult thing. I acknowledge that. And I talk to parents. I've been here now going on 16 years. And parents are afraid to do that. They're afraid of their name being revealed as the person that reported that the door was open, or sharing information. But I will tell you that is the way that you can be most responsible in keeping the building safe and being an active participant. It's what we tell our students. And we've started to see a shift. We've started to see students, as recently as a few weeks ago, come forward with information that allowed us to deal with a student, and we were able to deal with that situation quite quickly. So if you see something, you need to say something and communicate with the school directly so we can address that problem and then follow up. Again, it's everybody's responsibility, and that's the way we can make it the safest place we can be.
And to follow up, Jim, how can I help my school better prepare for emergencies and protect students?
Again, I think it's open communication with the student. I think it's the same question worded a different way. Open lines of communication with students, being aware of the code of conduct, being aware of what your students are doing in school, talking with your children, and it's hard. I have some teenagers at home, especially the boys. They don't really have much to say on a nightly basis. But you need to engage your children in conversations, and I know you are, and it can be frustrating, but continue to ask them what's going on at school, what are you seeing, is there anything you want to talk to me about? They need to know that you're continuing to ask those questions so they start to feel comfortable opening up when they might not feel so comfortable as they get older. That's where I've seen the most fruit on the tree, is when we start to have communication that's really open and honest with our kids.
And regarding students, just to follow up something I think would be important to share, you've met for a while with a number of students who want to explore different safety measures, work with you, work with your building team. They have ideas, they make recommendations. Can you elaborate a little bit?
Yeah, we have great students at Hendrick, Hudson, very intelligent, very thoughtful students. Shortly after Parkland, obviously there were a number of protests and movements to do certain things. And it was really an opportunity as an educator to empower students about what they wanted to do. For me, it wasn't about protesting, it was about how do we recognize what's going on and kind of allow our students to work through the process of dealing with these difficult situations. As a result of that, we've had a lot of open dialogue with students. You know, I had a number of forums over the course of one day where I stayed in the library and made myself available for about 4 hours during lunch periods to go over safety protocols in the building, to go over where we are with our safety processes, much like we're doing tonight, but to also talk to them more importantly about what concerns them. Because we all have our own concerns, but really the more important ones, at least from my eyes as an educator, from my perspective, is what are the kids thinking? And I often, you know, in my career have to bring myself back to, we really need to use them as the resource because they know what's going on, they know where the issues are, and they need to be assured that they should be comfortable coming forward. So that was the first step of many to try to continue to encourage them to communicate with us as adults. And it has bore fruit, as I said. I've had a number of conversations with 2 students in particular who I'm meeting with quite regularly, and their main concern is, you know, what are we doing moving forward in 3 particular areas that they've identified. And I've asked them to do research, I've asked them to come to me with, you know, some backup as far as where they want to go. And I'm working very closely with them. So I think engaging our kids in conversation, sometimes very tough conversation, things that make them uncomfortable, it really helps us get a better understanding about how safe they feel. Because we can do things that we think make the building safer, but if we don't ask them about how they feel and what they feel about as far as the steps we're taking, we may be missing the mark. So that's really been some of my focus, is to have a lot of conversation, obviously with parents. I see you guys out around and everything, and definitely have gotten, you know, some input, but I've really tried to focus on, you know, what are you guys as students feeling about the building? And I think generally overall they feel that Hendrick Hudson High School, I can only speak to high school, I'm the one principal up here tonight, I drew the short straw, I guess. Sorry. But they feel safe at Hendrick Hudson, but they have some questions. They have some questions about what do we do in this room versus this room that's a different layout. And those are things that we'll be addressing as we roll into the summer and plan for that, you know, that September 15th cutoff to make sure that everybody has an idea of what we're doing.
Thank you. We're going to throw this one to Mr. Merlini. The question is, what security measures are being given to all full and part-time employees, including teachers and faculties, with reference to locking classrooms? Currently, substitute teachers don't have all the keys to classrooms and don't have the ability to lock children in if need be the case.
Okay, so this is one of the areas that we notice that there is a problem. We have teachers that have keys, we have full-time subs that have keys, but then there are instances, a few, where we have these part-time substitute teachers that come in that it's hard to give them keys because they're in multiple classrooms. So they're in 3 and 4 classrooms during the course of the day. So it's been a bear trying to get them all the keys that they need. I've been working with the assistant principal here to try to close that loop on that and going forward and how we're going to address that issue. One of the things that we've been doing is we've been installing different kind of locks in the building where they have thumb keys on the thumb locks on the inside, so they don't necessarily need a key to lock the door. If they close the door, they can turn the thumb and it locks the door. We're also demoing a couple of locks that are card access locks, so that a substitute teacher can be given a card, just like we all have our ID cards, and that card can be programmed to work those 3 and 4 classrooms. This way, when they're going and moving about the building, we can program it. If someone loses a card, we just deactivate that card, and we can make it specific to whatever we want to do and that person. And the bond that you guys all approved, that's something that's going to allow us to do a lot of this work moving forward with the card access, specifically for the high school where we have those teachers that are going into several classrooms during the course of the day, which makes it very hard for security because we never know where they're going to be and who's going to be out and how do we have to secure that area. I have been migrating through the buildings as I've been going along, and changing out to intruder locks where I can. Intruder locks gives the functionality of being able to lock the door from the inside and able to lock the door from the outside. So teachers have their key, it works both sides of the door. So they can close that door, they can lock that door wherever they are inside that building. It gives them access. Moving to a card access is also nice because if a teacher loses a key, then you have to know that they lost the key, and you have to pull those cords, put all new cords in, so there's a cost associated with that, as opposed to have just a card where you just deactivate the card, and then you can just reactivate another card with that, so it cuts on costs too. So we're looking at all those different solutions to provide that, and that's something that I'm going to work with Mr. Mack and the assistant principal moving forward.
Listen, I think it's important that I acknowledge that this issue is predominantly a high school issue. There were questions at board meetings, there were questions about keys. I can tell you, as the building principal, and John Anderson is here, and a former employee, the custodian at the time, when this issue was raised about people not having keys, we did a key audit. Literally walked classroom to classroom and asked to see what keys the teacher had on their key ring. What you have to understand about the key system at the high school is that they're all exclusive to the particular door that they're in. So if you're in the math wing, to be clear, if I'm in Mrs. Bailey's classroom, which is the first one on the left-hand side, that key that Mrs. Bailey has is exclusive to her room. It will not open any other door in that wing or any place else. Only with this system, with one of the particular systems, particularly that one, the only way to deal with that would be to give Mrs. Bailey a master key. And for me as a building principal, that is an issue. To have teachers or other people, you want to limit the master key thing, because that gives you access to basically any area that's keyed with that particular key system. When we did the key audit, it reared in excess of 35 master keys that teachers had acquired over the years. Okay? So keys are a predominant problem. They are a predominant problem to the high school. I can tell you that teachers that teach a schedule here on a regular basis, whether it's an assigned to the high school teacher or a long-term sub that's assigned to or an everyday sub that's assigned to the high school, they have keys for their rooms. As Anthony said, the issue becomes substitutes that are assigned day off. So that person may be covering for a math teacher that teaches 5 classes, but then we also have the ability to use them for another 3 periods. And those 3 periods may be in the social studies wing one period, the science wing the next period, and the language wing in the next period. All with individual keys that are exclusive to those doors. I will not, as a principal, unless I'm directed by my boss, give a substitute a master key. I just don't think it's a good practice. So until I'm directed differently, it's just not something I'm going to do, especially after we've had a key audit that revealed that we've had people, even though we've asked them to turn their keys in every summer, those master keys don't show up on the rings in June. They seem to disappear. And then they magically showed up. So we dealt with that problem, and I can tell you, worked with the HHEA, our teachers union, to address that problem. So the issue is really the high school, and I wanted to make sure I acknowledge that because of the nature of our schedule and what we do here. Okay?
Our next set of questions pertain to drills and planning, emergency training, and the like. So I'll ask Alteris to open up this part of the conversation. How often, in addition to mandated fire drills, how often should safety drills be performed?
The state right now requires, I think we mentioned this earlier, 12 emergency drills that are conducted, 4 which are lockdown drills, and the other are evacuation drills or fire drills. That's the minimum number of drills that are done. Some schools do more than the minimum. Obviously, it's a time-consuming process because you lose instructional time, particularly with a lockdown drill. It can take some time. We work with each of the schools to refine the process so that they can effectively do the drills, effectively release from lockdown. And after each drill, the drills are evaluated and debriefed upon to identify things that they can learn upon and improve upon as well. We do assist the schools with evaluating drills periodically throughout the course of the year. Local law enforcement and county police, state police are also invited to the drills to assist with the process because, again, if there is going to be an emergency at the school, they're obviously going to be involved in these processes as well. In addition to that, we conduct tabletop exercises with each of the buildings, as I mentioned earlier, with specific scenarios. And these are more longer 2-3 hour tabletop exercises where we really go at a granular level as far as some emergencies and how they would respond. And if we have outside stakeholders like law enforcement or other members there, we can actually go through these drills and identify any gaps and loopholes in planning as we go along as well.
Thank you. Jim, do you want to weigh in on the actual performance of running the drills and the mechanics behind that?
Yeah, the specific question was, do school employees run the drills or are outside safety consultants running the drills? It depends on the day, it depends on the drill. It's usually a collaborative effort. Fire drills are pretty run-of-the-mill kind of activities that I would say the police are not showing up for, nor is Altaris. But we joke inside schools about how we only do fire drills in the nice weather. We only do fire drills when it's not raining or snowing. All joking aside, that will start to change next year. We're not going to be announcing fire drills even to staff because we find that they're educators. They're trying to work around drills and things that are planned because they want to maximize their time, especially in a year where we've had 8 snow days. We are going to keep a very tight circle about who knows about drills. It will be disruptive to the day, to the days, but we're hearing the message loud and clear, and we have to recognize that we can't just do things the way we've always done them. Fire drills are done, I would say most of the time, 99% of the time, by school officials. Lockdown drills are more collaborative efforts as well as any kinds of tabletop activities. And the purpose there is to give a different perspective. As a school leader that's been doing this for 23 years, I probably give the same responses over and over. So it's good to have John and Cliff here to kind of give us some feedback. I think in the lockdown that Cliff was here, we really talked about the ability to see in the classrooms, and that was a problem. That the new doors that we put on are really nice doors, but they have huge windows. And if students aren't really packed into an area where they can't be seen, you can see if people are in there. So what did we do? We decided, with the consultation with Anthony, we bought blinds for the windows. They're very simple. They're felt fireproof blinds that roll up. In a lockdown, the teacher simply goes over while they're locking the door. They can lock the door with one hand and pull the blind. It just drops. It's got a weight. When we did the next lockdown drill, highly effective. Could not see in the rooms at all with the rooms that had them. So we made sure that we ordered enough. And I believe because they're custom made, because all the windows have different sizes, you want to make sure that they're covering the window completely. There's a little bit of a backorder. So we have about 10 classrooms left by the beginning of the year next year. All classrooms and instructional spaces will have those blinds. So we debrief after all these drills as well, as Joe and others have said, to make sure that we're hearing from different people. And we debrief, especially during the lockdown drills, with a collective group of people that are on our emergency response team. And those people are not just teachers, they're not just administrators, they will be SROs, they are security officers, nurse, teaching assistants or aides, other security officers, not just the director. It can be really anybody that's a staff member in the building. And the idea there is to get a different perspective. The principal's perspective in a drill is different than the food service director, who has to deal with if it's a lockdown during a lunch period. What's that perspective? So those debriefings happen almost every time there is an issue to get feedback and change how we do things or adjust.
Good. Thank you. Question for Mr. Anderson and Mr. Mackin also. Does the head of security or school resource officers at each building have the power or ability to make a decision during an altercation, or do they have to discuss with the building principal first?
So, John's bigger than me, so I looked to him first to see if it was all right to answer first. do they have the power and ability to make a decision during an altercation? So if there's an altercation, first of all, I think the priority is to de-escalate whatever the altercation is. That's John's role. That's the role of the security officers to de-escalate. To get to a point where they can consult with a principal or an assistant principal so that we can start to hammer out exactly what happened, get them to look at cameras or look at video and try to find out what happened. Their job during an altercation is not to be trying to break up a fight and start to, make decisions about where we're going next. The main issue is student safety and staff safety, and to de-escalate what's going on. With that in mind, these folks have been trained. They've been trained with Handle with Care, de-escalation training. We've done some dialectical behavior therapy training. We're dealing with social emotional issues. So these are trainings that all of our security staff have gone through. Most of our teaching aid and teaching assistant folks have gone through. So they have been trained, I think, pretty well. But again, the most effective thing is their relationships with kids, and I think that's what really helps de-escalate these issues and not get us into tough situations.
Mr. Anderson, we'll throw this one to you. Wondering what safety measure are being taken, if any, to safeguard children while outside at recess, on the playing field, participating in sports, and when they're exposed and vulnerable?
Well, I think every adult that's out there on the recess field and different things have the responsibility to use their phone, radios during the day, gym classes during recess to communicate with each building as that's necessary. We're also the district hiring 3 community security people will be stronger throughout the district as well under the resource processes of the schools. Here at the high school, we're probably much at every game. We try to get around as much as possible, get talking to the kids, get the kids to communicate with us. The most important thing to keeping our building safe. They know more than anybody else does. And the more our relationships are built, the better off we are.
What training is being provided to assist staff and students during an active shooter event? So I'll have Altera start that off, and then Mr. Nani join in.
Sure. Our ongoing training is all staff needs to be trained in all the emergency response protocols by September 15th or within 30 days of fire, whatever it is sooner. All staff go through a training in response protocols, and something we have not really talked about tonight is prevention and mental health, because that is a critical issue for all we do to keep people out of our buildings, to respond to emergencies. Mental health has become thrown to the top in the forefront as one of the critical issues that schools need to really focus on. We talk about keeping people out. Sometimes the threat is within the building lawfully. And it's critically important, going back to Mr. Mackin's point about how we can, as parents, be involved. It's really important that you keep your ear to the ground. You are involved in your children's social media to identify what's going on. There really is no expectation of privacy at the student level. Because again, a Secret Service did a study many, many years ago about active shooters. And what came out of that is there is no profile for an active shooter. What they did find is that someone knew something that they failed or refused to share with people about what was going on in that person's life that potentially could have thwarted that issue. And we saw that in Parkland. We saw failures on a number of different fronts from law enforcement throughout the people that knew that suspect. So it's very, very important. So we talk about that. We are not mental health experts. We do not claim to be. The district has a number of different resources, both internally and externally, that they pull upon. There's open door policies, there's psychologists, there's regional people that are available as well. But we do talk about prevention. We do talk about the warning signs that you need to look out for. Because the best way to manage an emergency is to prevent it from happening in the first place. And we know that. And then we go into detailed training on the response protocols, many of which would be utilized in an active shooter situation. Again, we go back to that all hazards approach where we're focusing on everything, not just the active shooter, all types of issues, weather-related infrastructure failures and many other things that are much more common or more likely to happen in the school district.
Good. Thank you. Anthony, can you weigh in a little bit on evacuation scenarios? Question mentioned active shooter drills, and we just heard from Alteris. And evacuation scenarios, do we practice evacuation scenarios, and how do we do such?
Sure. So let's go to, we're moving touching on this whole night and the drills that we do, and the 8, the 4, the 12 that we're required to do. And 8 of those were required to be performed before the December 31st deadline, so they're happening in the first half of the year. So the answer is yes, that we do drill those. Active shooter, we haven't done an actual active shooter scenario throughout a building, but we do talk about it with our teams and things like that. We have the ability to do tabletop exercises with them to go over the protocols of what this would look like and what we're looking to do and how we'd address that. In speaking with Mr. Mackin, he is contemplating doing an active shooter drill at the high school. We don't know what that's going to look like. We would work with our terrorists, and we would work with the SRO and other law enforcement officials on how that would roll out or how that would look like, what that would look like. But we'd also work with our mental health professionals as well. Again, it might not be something you want to do at an elementary school because of the nature of the individuals that are there or something like that. So all these things have to be thought out and processed before we just jump into these things. So we're going to work with everybody and discuss what we can do with that. But we are doing evacuation drills, and we do do those regularly, and they do match our policy and how that rolls out. So.
Can I just give a quick overview of the drills that were done at the high school this
Sure.
year? Because, I think this is a good practice for anything. When you go through a year and you don't realize what was done until you sit down and write it down. But at the high school, for an example, we did do our 8 fire drills. We did 3 lockdown drills, 2 actual hold-in-place drills for different actual scenarios that happened, and 1 lockout drill that was an actual scenario. As far as training, our CERT team had 2 training sessions with Altaris that were a combination of informational meetings and also active tabletop drill scenarios, and then debriefing about what next steps are to be taken. We also developed a threat assessment team and went through training through BOCES to develop how does our threat assessment team, when they get information, how do we process that and decide whether this threat is really imminent or not, and what's done after that. That team has met multiple times. And again, this is a process. But I'll tell you, over 23 years of doing this, is that after each event, these processes can morph depending on the outcome of the incident. That at least has been my experience and my observation. What we did right after Columbine is somewhat different than what we do now after Parkland. And we have to remember that we went to school to be teachers and educators, and there's a lot of things that go into considering an active shooter drill or these drills. We're dealing with people that are not law enforcement people. We're dealing with children, and the fallout of doing these drills, while important, so there is muscle memory, as John said, there are other things that happen as a result, depending on the programs that you have in school, depending on the socio-emotional state of some of the children. And I want you to know, all these things are taken into account when we do these things. So I feel strongly that we need to do an active shooter drill, and my hope is that after we get more information and things from Altaris and working with the SROs as they come in, and BOCES, that we'll be able to do this, and we'll be able to do it in a manner that is informational to everybody and will make our building safer. Just to end on what we've done, we also had our threat assessment team has met with the BOCES regional safety coordinator to begin to establish protocols for that assessment team. And then we had 2 of those people on our emergency response team attend a multi-hazard emergency training with the Department of Homeland Security, and they came back and kind of debriefed. So we're collecting a lot of information and trying to evolve and amend our processes.
Thank you. I'm going to throw this one over to Anthony for starters. Is the school and district as hazard-free as possible, both inside the buildings and on the grounds?
So, as I see it, yes. I mean, it's hazard-free as possible, but things change on a daily basis. We went through, and hazard, there's a lot of different things that constitute a hazard and what that can mean. We could talk about a tripping hazard, or we could talk about something with one of the athletic fields, or we could talk about a door that's not closing properly, and it's for an elementary school kid going out that door, it's hard to open, and he could get trapped inside that, with that door swinging back or something like that. So I have, custodial staff that reports to me, They're required to go around their facilities and look for, different situations that pop up. We had a rough winter, and I had a lot of potholes that arose over the winter, and then, we tried to attack those as fast as possible. And then I still see some things that still need to be addressed with potholes and things of that nature. The bond that you guys passed will also address some of these issues in terms of doors, closures, things of that nature that I perceive. For the most part, buildings are hazard-free. Like I said, we have a good maintenance staff that maintains things. I also get reports back from, staff and community members. Community members will email me, or they'll call in and they'll say that, I just drove past one of your buildings and I noticed that, there was a situation, and we try to get those as fast as possible to make the buildings as safe as we can, because that's what we're all trying to achieve here. We want to have a safe, healthy learning environment for all your children and students that come in, and staff members that come on a daily basis to the buildings.
Thank you. We're going to stick with Anthony. Of the many hats he wears, he also is the supervisor to the transportation director. So this question is about bus drivers. So there are bus drivers well versed in conflict prevention and resolution.
So, like Joe said, I wear many hats, and the transportation supervisor reports to me. For our drivers and our custodial staff, which in a lot of instances is the same individual, our guys drive the buses in the morning, then they get off, they go and they clean the building, and then they go back and then they drive the bus again. And then we have a bunch of individuals that we call chauffeurs, and they drive the smaller buses throughout the district, and they bring the kids to their different programs wherever they be, maybe it be in district or out of district. And those individuals go under a series of training. So we have training that transpires over the summer, where we bring all of our staff in, and we do a 1 day of training with them. It's an 8-hour day, and we go over different things, and we're mandated by the New York State to go over different things, and they send down to us different protocols and different training that the bus drivers must have. And then we do some training in the winter. We do another series of training with them. We'll do like a half a day. Those individuals will come in, and we do 2 different days of that, because we can't get all the staff in on 1 day, because some people have to drive, some people have to do other tasks to make sure that they can get things going. We also meet with PPS, people personnel services. So we also meet with them, and they have issues and things that they have to tell our staff and members as well, in dealing with a lot of the special ed kids that we transport in different situations that arise. We also have training with DASA, which is the Dignity for All Students Act. So we have that kind of training for our members as well. They're also required to go on to, we have a GCN, which is an online training network, and we have different programs on there where our staff members all have a login ID. They log in, and we have a checklist to make sure that those individuals log in, and I get a notification of individuals if they don't, and then I hound them until they take that training as well. We have had other training with dealing with aggressive parents. If there's an altercation at a bus stop, something like that, parents trying to get on the bus, parents are not allowed on the bus at all, regardless of the situation, and only allowed to stand in the doorway. So we have training with that on how those bus drivers can deal with that individual and try to de-escalate that issue, so we don't have any problems with that. So they do have a myriad of training, and some of it is dictated by the state, and some of it is dictated by myself and the transportation supervisor sitting down and trying to determine, going through different pamphlets and booklets and trying to find out what these individuals need to be around these children to make sure that they have a safe voyage back and forth to where they go.
Thank you. Next question. Going forward, will the school district website have clear definitions of each type of safety scenario? Even though New York State statute doesn't enforce lockout or shelter-in-place drills, will drills be implemented so all schools are well-versed in the proper protocol? Will each school send out their own communication, since each building has their own building safety plan? And is there a way, this way there's a clear communication for parents with regards to what is taking place in each school? Will we implement a lockout? When we implement a lockout, will we have a single point of entry, even if other staff have their own designated entry, ensuring that each principal knows exactly who's entering the building during the lockout? So there's a lot there. I'll answer a few. I'll have Alteris step in with some of the, one more time with some of the training. I think one of the main issues we learned when we did our debrief after the most recent lockout, things we learned with Alteris and then the lockout of the principals of the buildings that were in the lockout is around single communication. One voice, one message being sent, whether it's to the district or to the affected schools. And also a decision that we're going to need to continue to deliberate on and make with regards to single point of entry. Those are two big issues that we have asked Alteris to weigh in on, to advise us on, because we do have other staff that don't necessarily belong to the school working in a school. And that will be a conversation that we're going to have that will, if we make an addendum, that will be in each building plan and let the affected staff know. I'll let Alteris jump in on any of those issues.
I mean, again, we talked earlier about that the lockouts, generally there is not supposed to be movement outside the buildings of student, staff, or visitors. And the side to that is that the exception is that when there is consultation with local law enforcement to determine what the threat is and whether it's safe or not to provide any exceptions to that rule. But generally, it should not happen. And I think the district, having gone through the process, understands, we learn something every single time, that we need to improve upon communications, both between the buildings as well as with the community, to make sure that everyone is on the same page as is implementing the protocols uniformly. Unfortunately, some of the state protocols are a bit ambiguous as far as what's to be done. And even though the buildings are training on a regular basis, we want to ensure that everything is done uniformly across the district. And that's for everything. That's for implementation of protocols, that's equipment, that's visitor management, that's policies and procedures. And that's something that we're actively working on and we want to improve upon, especially when we identify something that occurs in a real incident as well.
And I'll comment, since again, I'm here, and the issue, particularly some of the questions surrounding the high school. I think as John said, during a lockout, we are in constant consultation with the law enforcement. We were that day in a constant contact with the New York State Police, who indicated to us that there was no imminent threat to the building, but we should stay. They recommended us staying in the lockout. The high school is a very different building than an elementary school or middle school, and I'm all about consistency. Anybody that knows me for a long time, and I've been doing this for a long time, to know that we should be in constant contact. I made a decision as the building principal to have very structured entry and exit policies for that particular point, because we were in contact with law enforcement and they did reveal that there was no imminent threat to the building. What does that mean? So if a parent wanted to pick up their child, we did walk that child outside to the car and allow that child to leave if there was an appointment. There was a food delivery to the food service area. That area, the door was manned by a security guard, and as the person went in with the food delivery, they opened the door and then they closed the door. These decisions are not made frivolously. They're not made without thinking. Again, not to keep giving you my resume, but I've been doing this a long time. It doesn't mean I can't improve, and I certainly will do whatever is advised of us. But I think it's important to address the actual issue, which part of it was the high school. And that was the reasoning behind the decision that I made, because we were told that there was not an imminent threat to the building, and we made some decisions at the front desk and with our CERT team and decided that we could do this safely given the fact that we have the most personnel as far as security goes, and that's what we did. We were in consultation with the superintendent as well. If that needs to change, I serve the community, so I will make those changes, but I did not at any point think there was a safety issue in consultation with the police, and that was my judgment call.
In that vein, are suggestions regarding school safety taken into consideration from all employees, not just teachers and administrators? Other school employees might see a different perspective that could be very helpful, so I'll have Mr. Mackin again and then Mr. Merlini weigh in on the debrief and how we engage our faculty in terms of doing things differently moving forward.
Yes, the structure of the safety team within a building is to be representative of all stakeholders. So the idea there is that those folks serve as the conduit to the administrative team as far as feedback goes. So we work with a CERT team that is inclusive of all stakeholders. Those stakeholders are there to collect information for that team and for the administration, so feedback can be very smoothly dealt with to that security team. So the answer is yes, all considerations from employees are considered when they come forward or when they come through that pipeline. So yes.
So we have other measures in place as well. So on the building level, we have a CERT team, BERT team in each building. And then we also have a safety committee that meets regularly once a month. We have individuals that are compromised with the whole district, different buildings, different hats, different professions, different staff members, etc., that serve on the safety committee. The same thing on the CERT teams. So if after an event, or if there's something going on, or a person has a perspective that they see something transpiring inside of the building, they can go to their building representative, they can mention the CERT team, they talk about their CERT team, they talk about it with their principal, and if it's viable, then it comes back to the safety committee, and the safety committee vets those concerns. We talk about them and we try to figure out a solution. If we think that we need to go to the next level, sometimes we'll go to the superintendent, tell them, look, these are the concerns of the different buildings, this is what's going on. How do you want to approach this? What do you want to do in these situations? Or I can go back to the building principal themselves, say, look, I'm apprised of the situation at your building, this was brought up to my attention. How do you want to address this moving forward? Do you have any solution to this? I have a couple ideas, maybe they have a couple ideas. We can sit down and hash things out. I've also, during the course of my tenure here, I have no problem meeting with other individuals inside the building because, again, I am housed in the district office. I'm out there daily, day-to-day, watching the flow of the building, how students move around the building, how you guys do what you guys do. So I have to look at all those different perspectives. I have to talk to the aides, the monitors, the teachers, etc., because they know what transpires in those buildings. I don't always know what they need at the end of the day. So I can impose some sort of regulation or policy, whatever, but then they're going to come back to me and say, this really doesn't work for the flow of our building. This doesn't work at all. So I need that feedback from those individual staff members throughout the district, and there's a way to process they're going through it. And like I said, they meet with their CERTs, their principals, and they bring it back to me.
Thank you. All right, we're down to about a handful of questions left before we wrap up. What considerations are being discussed, Anthony, you can take this. What considerations are being discussed for safety on the buses and outside recess?
Similar question to above with the driver training and dealing with different things that they have to on the course of the day. So along with everything else that my drivers do, they also get a list of students with allergies or special needs. So if they're on the bus, they know that so-and-so may have a peanut allergy or something like that. So if they see something transpiring with that individual, they know someone was bringing snacks on the bus that they're not supposed to, they can reach out and they can radio back in and say, look, I have this situation going on. We have video training. We have one for gun on the bus. Like I said, we have the GCN training. We have cameras on the bus that we have the ability to see what's transpiring on a day-to-day basis. We don't check those videos every day unless the driver brings it to our attention that there was a situation on the bus that needs to be looked at. And then we send those videos off to the principal. The principal reviews them, they get back to us, and we figure out what we want to do moving forward if there's any kind of discipline or anything like that. Consideration being discussed for outside recess, we kind of touched on that a little bit before. But again, it's a learning experience. We're always trying to figure out new ways of doing things. In terms of meeting with Alteris, one of the things that they did was they looked around our outside facilities too, and they made recommendations based on what they saw outside. I don't want to go into all the specifics of giving away the keys to the castle, but they made recommendations based on safety concerns that they had with children being outside of the playgrounds during recess. A lot of the monitors and the aides know about them. We've made corrections to some of them, and we have to make more corrections about going forward.
Thank you. Question regarding school resource officers. Other districts are having school resource officers in all of their schools in the district. What are the intentions of our district? So we're entering into a 3-year agreement with the county police for a school resource officer. They have a very robust school resource officer program that includes training and ongoing support. And I'll let Sergeant talk about that in a minute. But what we will be doing with the sergeant is we'll be continually evaluating that program. As Mr. Mackin said and the sergeant said earlier, there are 3 roles and responsibilities that the SRO has, and the very last one is to actually be an active police officer on school campus. And we believe in that too, otherwise we would not have worked with the county, or we would not have made the financial commitment we did to just have cops at school. It's much more robust, it's much more rigorous than that. I think the issue is in terms of looking down the road in the future about what our intentions are. It's also a financial conversation here. School resource officers are not cheap. They're a full-time employee of the department, and we own a vast majority of that cost. We owe about 185 days of a 240-day work year. So there's a significant cost, and there should be, for the quality that we receive, for their training, for their ability to do their jobs and represent our community well. There's legislation being debated in Albany, and we spoke and stood with Senator Murphy a couple Fridays ago with regards to that legislation that the Senate passed. And it's on our website, and I won't bore you with all of the details, but specifically it opens up funding. It opens up funding for school districts to employ school resource officers. It opens up funding and legislative variances for retired law enforcement officers to work in the school district in a school resource officer-like capacity. Right now, if you're a retired law enforcement officer and you're younger than 63 years old, you're not going to work in a public setting because you have salary cap. So many of these folks who retire, they go on to private industry, they do private detail work because they're still interested and engaged and want to work in their field, but they can't do so in a public school or even a college campus. So hammering our elected officials to provide us with some financial flexibility, I think will play a major role and be a factor in how and if we move forward with school resource officers in other schools than just one. I mentioned earlier, the board made a commitment in the budget that was overwhelmingly passed of $250,000 for security personnel, additional personnel that will work with John Anderson and a full-time police officer for the district, but will for the most part be housed at Hendrick Hudson High School. So we need your help in pounding the pavement and letter writing and letting our elected officials know that this is important. The governor was tossing around some ideas of this back in February after Parkland, but it was the New York State Senate that took those ideas and actually got it passed, and now it sits waiting approval from the legislature, from the assembly. So, Sergeant, if anything you want to add about the school resource officer program or your relationship with other districts and what we can expect from you guys.
Yeah, thank you. So the school resource officer program is a program where the officers who want to come work in the schools, they put in for it. It's a requested position. There is a selection process, and it's not an easy selection process. To speak quite frankly, not everybody is made to work with youth, and I'll be straightforward. But there's officers who are excellent working with the youth, and they're excellent working in the school. They've been selected, and they've been trained. We have there's a 5-day class they go through for school resource officer. It involves things such as prevention, intervention, emergency planning for schools, as well as the legal ramifications for certain actions with juvenile offenders and things like that. So it's a comprehensive class. The next thing is, on top of that, we also give tactical training. Again, our officers are well trained tactically, and they are well equipped too. We understand that law enforcement is part of our function, and I will not have people out here who are untrained. So everybody who comes into our program is trained on top of the regular police training, is trained in school resource officer, and they're also tactically trained as well.
Thank you. Are all district employees trained with dealing with conflicts or threats, not just teachers? So I'll ask Mr. Merlini to start that off, and Mr. Mack can
Sure. So, as we were discussing earlier, and by law and the protocol is that all staff must be trained by that September 15th deadline, and all new hires have 30 days to be trained. So, yes, so we have online training, we bring them in, we have them set them up with accounts, and they can get on there and they can do their training for those two programs.
I think we answered this a number of times. There's a combination of all different kinds of training that happen. As far as, there's video training available, there's full faculty training that we do that goes more over the processes and steps that we take in different drills. I think moving forward, we want to start at the high school, at least, and speaking with students, this idea came from students, to really start to model what we do and practice, the tabletop-like scenarios. Where do you go in this particular room for this particular drill? Because all the spaces are they're unique in this place. They're very unique in this school. Classrooms can be vastly different. So I think the idea is to look at it from a staff perspective and train them by department, and also from a student perspective, start to look at the ninth grade, and as students come into the ninth grade, really have open, honest conversations about what you do, when you do it, how you do it, through the peer leadership program and also through guidance.
Thank you. And lastly, what actions, we'll ask Alteris to jump in first, what are the actions that can be implemented in the short term that don't require a lot of effort or money but can have an immediate impact on safety?
Right. At the top of the list is training, and we've talked about it, many times tonight, as far as making sure that people are properly trained to both identify threats before they occur, be turned into something which can harm people, and to be able to respond effectively. And that's an ongoing process. It's not just a one-off type of thing. It's an ongoing process. We talk, some of the interventions deal with on-demand training. There is no replacement for the dialogue that occurs in the training session when people have the opportunity to ask questions, the what-ifs that come up there. So to the degree possible, we're always doing outreach programs with the faculty and role-specific training, because everyone in the district has a different role that they fill. Having solid district policies and procedures that are strictly enforced and that are uniform throughout the district. It's important to not only have a solid procedure, but that we need to make sure that everyone's accountable for following those procedures. And it's in a district of this size, it's not without challenges. We understand that. And I will say I've seen varying degrees of it, throughout our experience over the years in doing that. The student and staff outreach is critically important, because again, we want to interact with these stakeholders, with the students, because the students know each other best. You know your students best, and the information that you provide to the district, to law enforcement, is critically important for us to be able to prevent things from happening before they turn into something major. Some of the other things is just vigilance on the part of all students and staff and parents, that if they see something, that they do something. Again, we really want you, you can always be wrong, okay? It's fine to say, well, I thought this was it turned out to be nothing. But unfortunately, when you don't say something, thinking that it's not a big deal, things have a tendency to go sideways, and in some cases become catastrophic. So it's critically important that you loop the right people into the process, so that they can make sure that the correct people identify and gauge the threat to determine if it's something that requires specialized assistance. Critically important. And these are the low-hanging fruit. These are the things that have minimal costs associated with them, but probably have a better return on investment than the hundreds of thousands of dollars that you're spending on other things that are equally as important as well. But they're not without time and effort and all the things. So I think that kind of round out the question.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to ask everyone to give some closing thoughts. We'll start with Mr. Anderson. And
I want to thank everybody for being here, for all the concern that you guys are showing. It's the most important thing out there. The communication between the kids and us, or our staff, is the most important aspect of keeping us safe. They know something way before we do, and we can find out before something happens. It just keeps us safe. It's the most important thing that we have. If you can help us with that, wonderful. The more communication we have, the better.
also want to thank you, and I just want to say I'm extra excited. This is a really excellent team you have here. I've worked with John LaPlaca, and I've come to know the administration here. And I am excited to have such a diligent group of men working together. And I understand, with however this goes with the SRO, I think you have an excellent SRO right here. Eddie Ramirez, can you just stand up for a second? I'm hoping he'll select this school. But no, you really, when we come here with these programs, it's important to me. I take it quite personally, to be quite honest. He represents me, he represents my department, and he represents us just as a community. So this is an important initiative for me. So I just want you to know I'm excited to be here, and I want to thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks.
Yeah, I want to, again, echo these two gentlemen. We appreciate the opportunity to come and speak to some of the issues. I think safety, of a school is of the utmost importance. As Joe said, I think he used the phrase, things are going to feel a little different as we go through this process, and we just need people to have a reasonable outlook about these changes, that when you come to a building, you may be asked to do things that you normally haven't been asked to do, whether it's presenting a picture ID, or it's waiting in the lobby until we call an office to check on your appointment. And these things, I see some people nodding their heads in the audience, these are things that not everybody, in my experience, is willing to do very easily. So we talk about safety, but sometimes when it's uncomfortable for us or inconvenient for us in our daily carryings out of our business, we want things changed. So I would just ask for a reasonableness and an understanding and a compliance, as you have asked from us, of the rules and processes we put in place to keep our buildings safer. We're not doing it because we don't like you or we want to waste your time, but when we make these changes, it's because we're trying to make the building safer. As I said, I'm a father of 4. During the day, I'm a father of close to 800. And I take this very seriously, very, very seriously. If you have issues, you need to tell me, and you need to talk to me and email me. I'm available. My phone stays by my bedside on a nightly basis. I'm rarely far away from email, and I usually respond pretty quickly. So I want to thank you, and please let us know what's going on.
Again, everybody saying thank you guys all for coming out. I appreciate you being here and taking this serious matter. I take it very seriously myself. Again, like Jim said, I'm a father of 3 children, and I worry when I send them out into the world too, when they go off to college and different things as well. So I know what everybody's going through. I know what it's like to send your child to school. I know what it's like to send your child out doing different things. So I get it. I'm going to try to make the schools the safest place that it can be for staff and students alike. I welcome feedback. I'm very excited about this bond and where it's going to take us and the things that we're going to be able to do with it. And I look forward to implementing all those things into the buildings to make the schools a safer learning environment for everybody. So thank you again. Thank you for passing the bond, and I look forward to doing all that work for you guys.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest eye-opening things having worked with school districts, for the past decade is how challenging the business of education is for many of the people that are sitting up here. It is certainly a 7-day-a-week job. We communicate with school administrators at 4 a.m. on a Sunday morning and weekends, nights, holidays, because it is an ongoing 24/7 occupation. The biggest challenge is that all of the people here have been educated and have been schooled on how to run schools, how to educate your kids, how to teach them to move on in life and to be responsible adults. And even though, as you've heard time and time again, that safety and security is a top priority, unfortunately the business of education routinely gets in the way of that on a daily basis. And we see that over and over again, that it's at the top of the list, and then 5 people walk into the office with demands that need to be taken care of right away, and it slowly moves its way down. I think one of the reasons why we're currently working with so many districts is because districts have identified the fact that they need help in this. They need help with steering the ship. They need help with actual project management and actually doing the deliverables on there. They know that you can't pass it off and that we can't do everything for them, but to assist them and guide them with the process to make sure that things are getting done and that people are safe is critically important. I will tell you that not every district gets involved with safety and security with our firm or with other firms or with anything else that they're doing for the right reasons. It's simply a check-the-box type of thing. And I will tell you that's not the case here in Hudson. These people are laboring over providing safe schools for all of your kids. And I can't say that about all of our clients, unfortunately. But it's something that they are passionate about. It's not all just talk. It's about action, and we struggle with it, and we're at countless meetings, and we do that on a regular basis. So I'd like to say that you're in very good hands with the team that you have up here, and many of the people that are not represented tonight that couldn't be here, but it's a great district.
Yeah, I do speak, actually. I've been the one who's been actually feet on the ground, boots on the ground, as the expression goes, working with the individual schools, doing the assessments, doing the evaluations, working with the CERT teams in the individual schools, working, going back and forth, communicating. And I guess you kind of stole what I was going to say. I want opportunity. Seriously, though, look where you've come from the last year. Where were you a year ago? Where are you today? Rome wasn't built in a day. You know, the panel up here represents individuals who have the ability to make decisions, make changes within the school. And that's one of the things I see when I'm in the schools, when I'm going out and about in the different school districts, is they want it all to happen yesterday. And we know in reality it can't. But to recognize what can happen, and that's the policies, the procedures, the protocols, the practices, the drilling, that's happening. And you know, there's a lot of questions, there's a lot of concern about this. At least the district has taken the opportunity to recognize that and move forward. I personally look forward to continue to work with this district as they get more and more advanced down the road.
I'll close with just a couple thoughts that, of course, were already echoed. I think one is safety is inconvenient. We heard from Mr. Mackin about drills at lunchtime or during inclement weather, or not necessarily notifying everyone all the time before it happens to make sure that people respond and we create muscle memory. But also the era we're in today in public education and maybe societal, we held about maybe 15 public meetings regarding our bond. And again, our bond is $18.5 million, so a little north than a third of it is designated for safety and security improvements, whether they're physical improvements by changing foyers, or they're technological, or doors and windows. I stood in front of hundreds of people, PTA meetings, senior centers, you name it, and talked about bulletproof glass, talked about doors that will close if you enter a key and you can push button them on your phone. We weren't necessarily talking about these things 15, 20 years ago. We weren't talking about these things when parents were in school. And it's a huge culture shift that becomes the number one conversation we have when we're asking to invest the public's money in improving our school's infrastructure. We're talking to vendors about a film that goes on windows to prevent bullets. This is real, and I don't think that the fervor and the focus on school safety is going to change, as it shouldn't, and that's why we've decided to work with Alteris. We've asked them to peel the onion back, to tell us what we don't know, and to poke holes in some of our systems and practices to make sure we create muscle memory to be better. We're a learning organization. We'll continue to learn. We'll continue to teach. We have work to do. We always do. And hopefully with you folks as partners, with the folks who are up here and the many of our key staff that couldn't make it, and our teachers and our faculty, we'll do better and we'll get better at this, because as I think Mr. Mackin said, this isn't our natural training. We learned how to teach reading or special needs students and the like, and this has hit us between the eyes at different moments in the last 20, 25 years in public education. And while, yes, we respond, and all districts respond, what do we do? How do we prepare? What could we have done differently? We're also working with Alteris to get ahead of the curve and investing significant dollars, millions of dollars of this community's money to make sure that our schools are safer and to make sure we feel better sending our kids to school. I'll wrap up one more time with next steps and what to expect moving forward. We are going to produce a document, essentially a transcript of tonight's Q&A. We know that that's important to the community, so we will publish that as soon as we can get to it. The video, as soon as it's edited and has some nice intro and closing music, we will put that on our website, and we'll make sure that the rest of our families know how to get that information. As I said earlier, this is the beginning of a series of conversations, not just around school safety, but about issues that surround school safety. How do we support kids who are bullied? Our discipline practices, sexting, texting, cyberbullying, things that may not necessarily be about hardening schools and training and muscle memory for staff, but how we can support kids, how we can support parents. We received a lot of really excellent questions in that domain that we've already begun building some information, how we can get info out to you folks, and how we can engage the community in these conversations. Our next step with regards specifically to school safety, we've already had conversations with PTA folks to make an event like this available at all 5 schools so parents can have a better understanding of what's happening at my child's elementary school, or how is what they're doing at the elementary school a little bit different than the high school or middle school. Those conversations at the specific building level are paramount. All the research around parental involvement says 3 things. Parents are tuned in to what's going on in the classroom the most. They care about what's happening in the school environment second, and they care about what's happening in the district third. So we're going to make sure that we connect you folks with our teachers and our building principals to make sure that information like this, to the extent possible, we heard a lot about confidentiality, and that's not an issue to be passed over lightly, but what we can share with you folks so what you can expect and what your kids can expect when they come to school. We thought we'd end at 8. We're ending, we're a delayed plane. We're ending a little bit later, but thank you for joining us. Thanks for making this a commitment, and I want to thank these folks for joining us and making this an important conversation in our community. Thanks, and have a good night.